Good afternoon. I am Suzanne Hillman, the project manager of the Holocaust Living History Workshop, and I am delighted to welcome you all to the beginning of this year-long lecture series. The title of this series is Hidden Histories, or Hidden Stories rather, Legacy of Pain. It is amazing to me as a historian and also to many others who have been involved in Holocaust education how much scholarship has been generated over the 70 years since the end of World War II. And what is even more amazing, I think, is that despite the tremendous amount of works that have been published, studies, sociological analyses, there are still so many stories that have not been heard, stories that have been sidelined or that have been outright forgotten. And with this in mind, I decided that this year's lecture series should be devoted to experiences and stories that have not been heard or that have not really that don't fit what is expected as a traditional or conventional Holocaust narrative. Some of you know that UCSD is one of only 50 institutions worldwide with access to the Visual History Archive. The Visual History Archive is a database of videotaped testimonies with survivors of the Holocaust and other genocides. And this archive is available for anyone to do research in. I'm happy to provide individual consultations. And I think video testimonies are a wonderful way for people to get a look into, or to forge a connection with a face. The Holocaust can seem so overwhelming, having claimed millions of people. I think the only way to really confront the tragedy is through an individual face. And having said that the Visual History Archive is a really great resource, I would add that there's one thing that's even better, one thing that will probably make more of a lasting impression, and that is hearing a person relate his or her experience. And that's exactly what we'll do tonight. Before I introduce our guests, I would like to thank our sponsors, the UCSD Library and Judaic Studies. They have supported our project from the beginning. And I would also like to draw your attention to our next event. Those of you who come to our events often know that usually we hold them on a Wednesday, like today, on a Wednesday. Our very next event is actually going to be on a Thursday. That's not a mistake, it's supposed to be that way, November 13th. And please help yourself to a flyer on the way out. We also offer a lunch seminar with the historian Wendy Lauer, and it's open for the public. But I do ask you to RSVP. There's flyers there. Also brochures for the Jewish Book Fair. We would like to draw your attention to their tremendous program that they have this year. I've got brochures for that too. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mrs. Ruth Weiss Hohberg of Bielsko, Poland, originally. Mrs. Hohberg will be introduced by Rebecca Tran. Becky is a fourth-year student at UCSD's Revelle College. She's double majoring in the study of religion and general biology. And I salute her for this very ambitious program of study. She's also minoring in Vietnamese. I'm impressed. Her focus within the study of religion is Judeo-Christianity, and I think that explains that's one of the reasons why she got interested in the Holocaust. So please join me in welcoming Mrs. Ruth Hohberg and Becky Tran.
Okay, thank you for having me here today. This is my first time interviewing in a live audience, so excuse me if I'm nervous. I just wanted to say that we'll welcome questions after the interview, and with that, shall we start?
Well, let me thank you for having been invited. And the fact is, it's also my first time, so Becky and I will swim through this together, and we'll each row with one oar and try to put it together.
Sure. So My first question is, what are your first memories of your childhood?
The funny thing is, I don't know for sure, but for many years, I always remembered looking out the window of my room and seeing across the street a striped awning and a man standing, well, the shopkeeper was standing in front of it. But that is not a memory of war or peace or anything. It's just a kind of a little vignette, a little snippet of vagueness at this point. But for many, many years, it was a very strong memory to the point where I remembered, I don't anymore, what color the stripes on the awning were. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I talked to my mother about it, and she didn't remember that. But that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask that question because Ruth has written a memoir of her experiences, and she starts at the age of 4. And I was surprised that she remembered so much at such a young age. But to more related questions, do you remember feeling safe as a child?
You know, that question strikes me kind of interesting because I don't remember feeling safe or unsafe. My parents were there, and that was my rock. So I don't think I felt unsafe. I do know that I felt very anxiety-ridden, because when you see people in a railway station, which is, you know, my image, my mental image, and there's a great deal of noise, and most of the people are in tears, and there's a lot of hugging and more crying, and that kind of thing made a huge impression on, I mean, somebody who's about yay high. Everybody else was bigger, and it resounded in the railway station. So those kinds of things would bring anxiety, but I don't know that I could characterize it as fear. And then, you know, other things were at the time when the Soviet army moved in, and they simply appeared at the apartment where we were hoping to be safe with bayonets and screaming and broke down the door kind of thing. That makes you feel nervous and frightened, but I don't know about the safe aspect, so some other word would have to be put in play there.
Okay, and if you said you wouldn't characterize it as feeling safe or unsafe,
I didn't know what could happen.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't know what could happen. It was just that it was different. You know, as you grow up and you know, well, you could be killed, you could be maimed, you could be hurt. I didn't know any of that. Mm-hmm. As an intellectual construct. I just knew that something was happening, and it was big and it was noisy. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how you characterize a feeling as that person of 4.5 years old.
What year?
Yeah, okay. Talking from approximately 1939 on.
The Russians come so much later.
Where?
I thought in Poland.
Well, again, we're in Poland. As I said, 1939 on.
Yeah, but I was just wondering when
this
you said
particular,
that the Russians came with bayonets, when was that?
I would think, see, again, I didn't have paper or pencil or any of those things to keep track, but my sense of it would be 1941-ish,
Okay.
if I may use that ending.
Okay.
Could you tell us a little bit about your home life? I don't mean to interrupt the interview, but I think we would all be interested in hearing a little bit about your family, what your parents did.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Sure. Okay, well, I'll start with the siblings because there's nothing to say. I'm an only child, which makes it very uninteresting. Of course, I used to be very envious at times for not having siblings. And at other times, I was very happy to be the apple of everybody being mommy and daddy, because all attention went toward me. But as far as home life, my dad, well, I was born in Krakow, which is the same city my mother was born in, except we were born in different countries because of the years that had passed, and the Poles had gotten their country back. What was?
What did your father do?
Yeah, my dad. My dad was a mechanical engineer, architect kind of person, and his father had emigrated to the United States when he was about 16 with the entire family. I think there were 6 siblings or so in my grandpa's family. And they settled in Brooklyn, New York. And sometime in probably, I don't know when, but must have been in the early years of the 20th century, the father, in other words, my great-grandfather and one of his sons, my grandfather, did not like it in Brooklyn, New York, and they went back. And my grandfather finished his growing up in Bielitz, or Bielsko as it's known in Polish, and established his family there, which is why I wasn't born in the United States in the first place. But if you don't mind, I'm going to put this on air conditioning. It makes me cold. And so we were living, so anyway, my grandfather also, so he established a business for himself, and it seems that he was a representative of the Czech Okochim beer companies, and they, for all I remember, and I don't know how it came about exactly, he either had it built or he built it himself. There was a building with a yard, with horses, with a delivery situation for the beer. You know, horses and what do you call those things?
Buggies, wagons.
Not buggies, but wagons with for delivery purposes. And then I remember there was a Buick and a chauffeur named Lawrence. Strange little bits and pieces that one remembers when somebody asks, you know. You don't think about those things as you live, but when somebody asks, they suddenly kind of come. And so it was a very comfortable life in this building, which does stand now. And I hope it's in some sort of condition. Anyway, while I'm on that, if I may, after the war, we were repatriated if we wanted to be, and we were. But when we came to, well, there was nothing touched actually in Bielsko. The city was quite intact. It wasn't like Warsaw in 1946, where there wasn't a stick that was standing. When we passed, that's how I know it. Otherwise, I'm not interested. You know, in other words, I never took an interest in Warsaw in particular. But in Bielitz, everything was intact, at least the streets were. But when we came and rang the bell, the door was shut in our faces, and people were terribly rude and sorry that we had survived, and they let us know it. So that's just by way of what happened fast forward, which is why I never went back. I never went to visit, to see the birthplace. So it was a very comfortable life, and in 1939, I believe, my mom, well, the doctors always said I should be in the mountains, so the city was an industrial city, so the doctors felt that it was a nice thing to send this little girl with her mother out to the country. So we were in Zakopane, which was a ski resort, in the summer of, I believe it was 39. And my dad sent a telegram saying, do not come back, go on to Krakow, where his sister, he had a twin sister, she lived there, and she was in desperate need of company because her husband had gone to Portugal on business. And she was left with the 2 children and the servants, but she was alone, basically. So my dad sent us to keep her company. And as fortune would have it, I became very, very ill. and we had to leave town. And she wouldn't come with us because she was waiting for her husband. So, you know, stupid little daily events lead you to either survive or not. And that's exactly what happened.
Where'd you go?
We went on, well, the doctor told my mother to make sure to be near or in, preferably, large cities where she could get medical care for me. So we went on to Lemberg, Lvov. And that's really how it happened that I survived, initially. I mean, there were places along the way where I could not have survived anyway, but that kind of put us on that particular track, evidently, because then the Russians came in and took us to Siberia.
And you said that your father told you to go on. How were you two how were the three of you finally reunited?
Oh, well, my father and his father, the boy who went to Brooklyn, packed their rucksacks and left, and they left on foot. They went to Krakow first to look for his sister, and they found her in they said it was a forest kind of a place outside of Lublin. And there were a lot of people there, apparently. I must say I don't picture their living conditions. I don't know if it was some sort of an organized camping situation or what. In any case, they were there, and my father insisted on continuing on because he knew that we had gone to Lemberg. But my grandfather and my father's sister and her children refused to come along. So my guilt-ridden father left and found us. And he walked across Poland, basically, because Lvov is just on the edge of Ukraine, which, by the way, now it's called Lviv, because it's part of Ukraine now. Does that approximately paint it? Okay.
When did you go to Siberia?
Okay, that's coming. I mean, if you wanted to. So while we were in Lemberg, the Germans were advancing, and the Russians were coming in from the other side. And one night, the Russians took the city. And after that, I don't know how long or anything like that in detail, one morning around 8-ish, the Russians came through the door of the apartment in which we were staying with an aunt, and they gave us 30 minutes. Well, first they ransacked the place. We never knew what they were looking for, but they gave us 30 minutes to take what we could and get downstairs, where we had trucks awaiting us. And we were taken to the railroad station, where they loaded us on cattle cars. Nobody ever told us where we were going, but that, in effect, is where we ended up after 4 weeks of luxury travel, shall we say.
And how old were you at that time?
Oh, 4.5.
Okay. Could you share some of your memories of what you remember in your trip in Siberia?
Well, I can tell you that on the way, again, my memories are very little bits and pieces. They don't have a real continuum, drama. Various stops on the railroad, and once a day, used to stop someplace. I particularly remember a stop someplace near a river, very open fields kind of thing, but there was a river going down. Oh, I'm still talking with my hands. And they made some kind of soup which smelled terrible and tasted worse. And I haven't eaten fish until I moved to California after that. It was some kind of fish soup. It was god-awful. And even if you were hungry, Oh, that smell was just terrible. So those are little bits and pieces that I remember, but there were hundreds of thousands of others that I don't remember. And my parents never wanted to really, they said, well, what's there to tell? Well, there's a lot to tell, actually. As far as life goes, well, when we arrived, we were taken off the trains. We were told to get off the trains, and we were loaded on trucks again. We had no idea where we were. The only thing that my dad knew, and I mean he shared it with anyone who would listen, was that we were not in Europe, because he saw when we crossed the Ural mountain range. It happened to be around sunset, and he said, uh-oh, we are leaving Europe. So we kept on traveling, and then we were unloaded someplace. And we had to get on trucks, which took us to a place where there were, we called them log cabins here in the country. No windows. It must have been October-ish. Again, these are all things that are very memory grounded, but I can't get more detail out of my head. And somehow windows appeared. They got put in, some kind of thing to close up those openings. And there was an outhouse someplace on a hill, and then down the hill there was a river. And it was quite cold. And we were issued what is known, well, let me put it in English, quilted jackets and quilted pants and felt boots. And so that was what, they didn't make them in children's sizes though. So that was too bad. And all the adults were told and assigned what their labor was going to be. The men were put to chopping trees and building roads, felling trees, I should say. And the women, whatever was needed. They were assigned on an as-needed basis, but everybody was assigned to work. My grandparents were with us, so they were considered too old to work, and of course I was considered too young, so I was being supervised by my grandparents. And as far as, well, nutrition, that was very tough going. There wasn't any. Whenever the trucks could make it, which was certainly not any time during the winters, we'd get an egg a month or something like that. Yes, sir?
What was the name of that camp in Russia?
Bielsko Drajne. Can you find that? I couldn't find it.
No, that's not the idea. My wife's family had the same story, but they were in Vologotska Oblast.
Which?
Vologotska.
Vologotska.
That's a little more western.
This was Yakutskaya.
On the map there?
I didn't. Yep. Mm-hmm. Oh, lovely, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Whoops. Whoa.
I'll take it with you.
Whoa. Okay. Someplace Aldan, the Aldan River, someplace along here. At this point, I don't think they have those settlements or even their names recorded. Maybe the Russians do someplace, but no. Well, originally, actually, I came from, well, it's over there. I should have, if I had known you were going to do this, I would have brought my pointer. My late husband had a wonderful pointer that comes out. I'm sorry, too, because I'm so short. Anyway, so it's over there, and we went through, let's see, we went through here, whoops, through Kiev, and then we went through, I remember some of the names of the cities we passed, because we didn't go straight through that way. We went down, let's see, I think, yes, we went through Omsk, I remember, Novosibirsk, and somehow or other, we ended up there. Eventually, however, in 1940, I'm not sure what year, 42-ish. Oh, yeah. Too many goodies. I'm right-handed. Lovely. So eventually we were liberated in when Stalin and what was his name? Sikorsky. At that time it was Sikorsky. They made an agreement whereby the people who were transported like that, and by the way, in reading this, this is a translation from the German that was written by my great uncle, who was 50 at the time, and it covers the same period. And he explains why all those thousands and millions of people were transported to those faraway nothing places, because we were all inhabitants of borderlands, and Stalin felt very threatened by the fact that many of those people would go over to the German side, hoping to save their necks. So he saved their necks, but took them away from being threats to him from the borders and put them in the hinterland, where he never allowed people to visit before that. But all of a sudden, he opened it up to, visitors in a way. They were prisoners, but still, he allowed people in. So at some point in 40, maybe 1 or 2 late in the year, we were, quote, liberated, end quote, and we were permitted to travel if we could find, excuse me, a way to go to anywhere except cities. So my mother had a fancy thing when she was young. She was fascinated by carpets, woven rugs from Bukhara. So she said, south. We go south. So we started going south, and we got picked up by the military once again, and we were taken to somewhere. Well, I guess it's not here. We were taken to Uzbekistan. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's here. Oh.
I picked the map.
I also have to make my confession and apologies. With all that traveling, I know no geography. I absolutely don't know where on this globe I is. It's terrible, but what can I tell you? We all have our gifts. So we ended up spending a night in Tashkent railroad station, 2 nights or 3 nights, sitting on the luggage, whatever was left. And then we got picked up and ended up in Fergana, which is probably a lovely place when you have something to eat, for a few months, and then we were taken out of there again. It always seemed like the military was showing up at 1 a.m. or so, but that's the art of intimidation everywhere. I'm sure, that's when the Germans show up, that's when the North Koreans show up, etc. In any case, so in Uzbekistan, we kind of had to settle in, and we stayed there until the end of the war, at which time we were given the option of leaving. In the meantime, during that period, we also had to take Russian passports, which was a major tragedy as far as my mother was concerned. But we didn't realize that at that time that eventually we could chuck those, which we did.
And how was your life in Uzbekistan?
How was life? Well, I would say it was a life of discovery in a way. I fought long and hard with my mother to allow me to go to school. And by the time I was 9, she finally did. She realized we weren't going anywhere. And so she allowed me to go to school, which I loved. You have a lot of questions, sir. What can I tell you?
Yeah, I have something
if I can.
I believe is very important.
Yes.
Is it correct? This is what I know from similar stories. who deported large numbers of people to murder them, Russians deported you and many like you to those camps in order, and they saved them. They did not kill people. And that's a significant difference.
I would absolutely agree with you, totally. Which is why I said, that's why I am here regaling you or hopefully entertaining you in some fashion. But yes, hundreds and, well, thousands of people died from malnutrition, from this, that, trees falling on them. Yes, but I always say when people say that the Russians mistreat you, no, they treated us as well and as miserably as they treated their own people. And in that sense, there's really nothing to complain about.
Excuse me if I interrupt. May we keep the questions for after the presentation, the interview, so that we can pass around an interview, not an interview, a microphone, because we would like to be able to record the questions as well. So please just hold your questions, okay? Becky, please.
Yes. And how was your experience with school? How did you like that?
Oh, gosh, I loved school. I could finally, as you can probably deduce by now, I like to talk. And being that I was growing up kind of alone, there were kids around me, and I loved it. And I also very, very much loved the learning aspect. I was really ready to bloom and be open and learn things. And I loved being able to have something to write on occasionally, because we had no paper, we had no pencils, we had no ink, we had no pens. And I really very much loved the physical motion of writing letters. It was just something I liked to do. I very, very much loved school. I don't know how distant it was. I know it took a long time to walk there, but I just loved it. And I got to, let's see, almost finished 3rd grade. And always admired the kids with the red galstuks, which were pioneers, which is part of the it's like Scouts, only it's more politically minded at that time. Again, you know, everything that I say to you was very, it's in a time frame. It doesn't exist in the same way anymore. It's like a time capsule, because that's what I experienced. Okay.
So I know you said that you and your mother and father were separated because you were sick, and you went to the mountains. Were you sick during this experience as well? Did you ever recover?
Oh, well, I recovered from whatever was wrong with me then. I don't really know what it was. It was quite serious. It was very high fever, and I got very nasty. I hit a playmate, which I had never done before during that, and whatever it was. But eventually, yeah, well, you know, we had malaria, I had pneumonia. I mean, you know, in the course of living, children get sick. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was sick quite a bit. Being an overprotected child, I was sick a lot. And, well, having malaria on a regular basis kind of keeps you in a state of, I would assume from this vantage point, in a weakened state in general. And the malaria thing, I think I had my last attack sometime in 1947. Mm-hmm.
And so you said your parents were overprotective.
I'm sorry?
You said your parents were overprotective. Did they try to protect you from any danger at the time?
Oh, absolutely.
Was life normal?
They tried to protect me from any and all danger. They mm-hmm. tried to... It's really hard to explain when you get 1 egg a month for the family, and they give it to you, and if you get... And sometimes when you're standing on these long lines, by the time you get there, it's gone. So mm-hmm. you've wasted a whole day. You know, you're scheduling. In other words, today, if I have to wait for 5 minutes in a store, it's like, You have a different way to pace yourself. You know that you're going to spend X number of hours on the line, whether you get it or not. And by the way, most interesting to me, at least, when I was working on this book, and the reason I worked on it was because it fascinated me in German, and I said, gee, let me see if I can do this. And I got drawn in. And, oh, just a few more pages, and I couldn't stop. So I kept going. He is writing about the same period in Kazakhstan. It was completely different. They had stores, they had kindred spirits, as it were. He had conversations with people. We had none of that. We were completely, isolated in terms of having any people from our particular environment with us. There were people from all over, with the exception of my grandparents. But I never really had a good connection with my grandparents. A comradely, I had a good connection, but it wasn't comradely. We didn't really jive. They were the rule makers, the rule givers, and the rule enforcers. They weren't comrades. My grandma didn't play with me, and that brings me to something interesting that this is all very unplanned, Suzanne.
That's all right.
And might be a lot longer than you want. But play is an interesting thing. My older son told me many years ago on the phone one night, gee, you never let us play, or you never played with us, something like that. And I said, oh, that's interesting. By this time, he was the father of children. And I happened to, that evening when I spoke with my mom, I said, I made an interesting comment about play. And she said, I'm not surprised. How were you supposed to know how to play? You never had a chance to play any more than, and she said, and part of it has to do with me, meaning her, because World War I hit when she was 5. And so she didn't play much, except that she played a lot more than I did, because number one, she had a brother who was always bossing her around, and they ran around tables and whatnot. I never had anybody. And number two, I was taking care of the household. When my mother was carted away with a really near fatal attack of malaria, I was left to cook for my father. I was 6 years old. I was left to feed him. So, play was not exactly part of the curriculum there. And so when my son said that to me, I thought that was very interesting, perceptive in a way on his part, but his attitude was blame rather than understanding. So that's how it is.
And fast forwarding, do you remember the day that you received word that the war was over, or that you can return to Poland?
In a way, I do. My expectations of that day, well, it was 1945. So I was 10. And don't do the math. It was something I had waited for with like my, I can't even say bated breath, bated body. And then it just came. And it happened to be a pretty day, but the birds sang the same way as they always did. And then the day turned into night, and I was really disappointed. Things just kept going, things just went on. Nothing huge and drastic and dramatic and wonderful happened on that day. So that was a kind of it was almost it was not almost, it was an anticlimax kind of thing. In a way, I don't know, is that a universal feeling? I just don't know. But it struck me that way, that the bells didn't ring. So it was a kind of oh, well, it's over. Oh, well, okay. Nobody, people went to work, we had lunch kind of thing. I had to go, I don't know, pick the mulberries or whatever anyway. nothing fabulous happened that day, only in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have noticed, by the way, that some of the experiences you have look a heck of a lot better later on when you look back on them.
And how shortly after the war was over did your parents decide to go back to Poland?
Oh, the decision didn't need to be made. It was just waiting to get, we didn't know what would happen. The announcement that came through, because don't forget we had no radios, we didn't really have anything. Things kind of trickled through. But we actually left, which is really the only thing I remember.
Mm-hmm. We
left on April 26th, 1946. So that was approximately a year after the war ended, until things, were able to be, a train was able to be sent to that particular settlement where we lived, and the people who wanted to repatriate got ready to go and board the train and that kind of thing.
And how was your journey back to Poland?
Journey back was very different. Well, first of all, the cattle cars, it took 2 weeks, not 4, because we weren't coming back from Siberia, we were coming back from Uzbekistan. It was kind of nice. It was exciting, just the whole idea. It was an adventure. And the cattle cars were not locked, which they were on the way up. So we could stand in the open doors and see the landscape go by. And again, it was like, gee, the farmers are tilling their fields, and everything was just as if it was always that way. And somehow my 10-year-old self went to drama and excitement.
And so you said when you came back to Poland, you weren't welcomed. What did your parents feel? Where did they decided to come to America?
What my parents felt, I would never know.
Mm-hmm.
They were not saying what they felt. I could only, observe. Again, by this time I was 11,
mm-hmm.
and I could only observe visually,
mm-hmm.
and draw my conclusions. And at the time, my conclusions probably weren't drawn until I was an adult and started thinking about it. Because when you're going through an experience and you need to get from day to day, your thinking process is very different. Now I can, almost 80-year-old lady of leisure, I can sit back and think, cogitate. But you don't think about things in the same way as when you can look down that corridor of events.
Mm-hmm.
So what they thought, they were not very happy. And that's another thing I realized much later in life. A couple of things, many things. One of which is that I never knew my parents as the really nice, joyous people they were. I never saw that. I just realized later on that they must have been, because of all the good things they did, the fun things they did. I never knew them as fun people. They were always concerned and worried about the next thing, the next day, the next meal, you name it, the job. There was always something to worry, just surviving some anti-Semitic remark and what I would bring home, coming home, beat up or whatever. So they were always worried, and when we came to the United States, they had no basis for anything. They had to start from the beginning, and they didn't even have the language. So it was, I never knew them, as I said. And the other thing I realized, also very much later, probably maybe 10 years ago, sometime in the 43-ish, I remember every single day bursting into tears, uncontrollable crying for 2 or 3 hours every day. And I don't know how long that went on, but it just hit me, that was PTSD, because then it stopped. And my mom didn't know what to do with me, and in the end, she would sit with me and cry. She said, well, tell me what it is. And sometimes she threatened to give me something to cry about if I didn't stop. But I couldn't stop, and she ended up crying with me. And all these years went by, and you know, like 10 years ago, I said to myself, it just hit me one day when there's a lot of PTSD work going on. I said, yeah, that's what that was. Children get it too. Mm-hmm. So anyway, these fun little revelations.
And could you tell us your journey of how you came to America?
Well, yeah. So we went back to Bielsko, where they were very sorry that we survived. But there were some exceptions. I mean, the people who were servants in my mom's home, if they were still there and if they happened to meet her, they were thrilled that we were still there. There's one particular story which I'm not going to tell now because I'm going to cry if I do. They were very sweet, but for the most part, people were very upset that we survived, and of course our apartment was not going to be given back to us. And so we tried very hard to get out. Eventually we did we couldn't get a quota number for quite some time, so we went through Stockholm, where there was an embassy. There was no American embassy in Poland at the time. But in Sweden there was, and somehow we made our way to Sweden, at which point the American, we got on some sort of a quota line there. I know nothing about those particular technical aspects of things because my parents protected me from all those worries. And then we went, my father went to the ship line or somehow. Anyhow, berths on ships were not available in any big way, and when there was a cancellation, my parents, the cancellation was for 2 people, 2 females. So that was March 12th, and she advised my father that he should take them and send his wife and daughter because it was going to save us $90. I turned 12 on March 15th. The ship boarded on March 14th. So I was able to, that was the ship line lady engineered that for my father. So my parents decided, okay, they would separate one more time. Because after the separation that when we went to in 1939, and when my father got stuck in Poland and walked across Poland, they said never again would they allow themselves to be separated. Well, they did. And so that's how we came to the United States. And, well, here I am.
Yeah.
Just to follow up what you just said, when you got to
Could you hold your question till later, please?
I was trained by the Shoah Foundation to interview survivors. So my question to you is the beginning of many questions. First of all, would you do your testimony with the Shoah Foundation or not?
You want to hear about that?
No, yes or no?
No.
Okay. I'm sure you had your reasons. Now,
no, not because I didn't want to, because they pulled out.
Well, okay.
They pulled out.
That's very surprising.
They lost interest.
Well, we'll go from there. You were in the camps. Were there schools in the camps in Siberia? Were there any religious holidays celebrated by the people who were there working? Or when you left your home city, what kind of, did you have any Jewish life?
Okay.
I mean, did you have a synagogue? Did you have friends?
Let me address that.
Sure.
Your imagination is wonderful.
Well, I've also interviewed a lot of people who had all that.
Really?
Yes.
Well, the Soviet Union was an atheistic country, and if you wanted any kind of worship, it had to be the worship of Uncle Joseph. No. So basically the answer is definitely no. Any worship that, or any observance that was conducted was strictly in secret. Yeah. Certainly no synagogue. Good.
No, no, I meant in your hometown. Was there
Oh,
a
in our
synagogue?
hometown. Our hometown had an opera, it had synagogues, my hometown had everything. But of course, on Kristallnacht, everything was destroyed. The Poles helped, and so did the Ukrainians.
Okay. And I understand there were no synagogues in Siberia. I just meant, was there any Jewish life before, and then when you ended up in Siberia, you then went to Uzbekistan, and was there any life there for you, any communal life? You said you were like a little entity, the three of you. Did you have any life there?
It's actually not something that I have much memory of. I do know that my dad, who was very mathematically inclined, always figured the calendar, and if he could find a little tiny piece of paper, he would write down in the tiniest little letters so that we, meaning him and my mother, would know when what is in the Jewish calendar, particularly the high holy days. But I must say we were a very secularized, assimilated family. We knew who we were, but it was not a deep thing for although peculiar things do happen with people. My dad observed Sabbath by not smoking that day and being a miserable critter, but that was his way. And he said his prayers from a teeny-weeny little, he had a little tiny prayer book which somehow survived in a pocket all those years, and he said his prayers every morning in a very private kind of a way I happened to notice.
Would you comment on why the Shoah Foundation wasn't interested? I'm curious about that.
Where are you? Oh, I kind of like to make, why they weren't interested. It was, I don't really know. They came, they interviewed me for 3 hours plus. We made an appointment for whatever the next thing is. And just at the same time, I was moving my mom, who was elderly, I was moving her to my home. And so I had called them and I said, could we change the appointment? And they said, sure. I explained to them what the problem was. And they said, let us know when you're available again, when you get her settled, which I did. And they said, sorry, we're not interested anymore. So I didn't get very warm feelings about how they handle things.
I'd like to know, after you came to the United States, how you settled in and what kind of a life you had here.
Okay. We were supposed to be met at the dock by my dad's brother, who didn't show. We were met by a very large lady in black who took us to an amazing building in a taxi. It was raining. And so she took us up to the 29th floor in this amazing building, and it turned out, I knew nothing about this.
This was in Brooklyn?
No, this was in Manhattan, on 72nd Street in Manhattan, at the Majestic. Oh. And these men in white gloves came out. I mean, it was unbelievable. And the lobby had flowers in it, and there were people, and what I later learned were minks, and it was March, so it was cold, and it poured all day. This aunt, it turned out that this was an aunt, and if anyone here is familiar with the name Arthur Schnabel, his sister, one of his sisters. No, he was a pianist. It was one of Arthur Schnabel's sisters. The whole thing is so weird. And so she took us to this place at the 29th floor, like a private lobby with big flowers and a mirror. And a black lady opened the door, and she wouldn't let us in until this lady with the black dress told her that her employer had said that it was okay for us to come. So that turned out to be my mom's cousin, who was married to a very wealthy banker. All of this stuff I had never heard of these people. This was all new to me. So we were good for 2 weeks there. I was very sick on the crossing because we hit a very heavy storm. I was terribly seasick. I swore I would never go on a ship again. The building swayed all night long. Well, it was a tower, the 29th floor in a 2-tower building. So that was quite an experience. But as far as settling in, it was not easy. It was 1947. In New York, apartments were scarce. People would not rent to people with children. I was 12 years old. I didn't qualify as an adult, although I behaved like one, unfortunately. And it was tough. It was tough. It was long. It was tough. Eventually, we found in a row house. A German couple rented us a room. They were very sympathetic with our situation. They were very expensive, and they became quite vicious as time went on. And so finally we managed to find an apartment. Anybody here familiar with Manhattan? Yeah. 142nd Street. A wonderful apartment. Lots of sun, many windows overlooking the Hudson River. It wasn't on Riverside Drive, but it's a very hilly street, and so we began to settle in, and I went to junior high school, and that was very tough because I didn't know English, and I didn't know that you go from classroom to classroom. All kinds of stuff like that. So all these little bits and pieces that became, great big hurdles and big issues. And then I got kicked out of there because we were living on 142nd Street, and I was out of the district, and we knew nothing about districts either. So, it was hard. That's all. I mean, I can go on and on, but let's not do that.
And just really quickly, how long was it until your father finally was reunited with you and your mother?
Oh, no, we came together. Well, 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks. It was just 2 weeks. The ship was, he was on for the next sailing of a ship, but there were only 2 on this ship, and she said, get out while the going is good, you save $90, and at that time we had no, I don't even know where he got the money from, how he managed to get that ship money.
Other questions?
So you never found out from your dad or mom how they managed to support themselves in all these different places, or have enough money to go to Stockholm, Sweden, or when they came to the U.S. with no language skills that were comparable? How on earth did you have enough money to go on a boat? I mean, where did it come from?
Well, my father's brother had left Europe to go on vacation in 1930, I don't know, 8 or 9 or something. Anyway, whatever their Odyssey was, which I couldn't really find out much about because my aunt wouldn't tell me. Yeah, people are funny. I know they were in France. Eventually, I believe they were in Cuba, but he did meet up with his brother eventually. That day he didn't come to meet us. I don't know, he was working or some such thing. They did meet up together, and I think the brother had some money that he was supposed to share with my father, so maybe he did. That's something interesting. In that family, money was never, ever discussed with me. So everything that happened just happened. But I know that, well, as far as how did they make it through, it was, they were working between felling trees and branding steer and translating a handbook for an American truck from English. Oh, this was real fun. English, let's see. It was written in English. My mother tried to read it and to translate it to my father in German, from where I went into the Russian. So it was a real three-way effort. Hey, you know what? The truck ran.
Hi, your command of the English language is fabulous.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I love you already.
Well, thank you. My mother was also from Poland. She's, was here in the United States for 50 plus years, and her accents were very noticeable and things like that. So could you talk a little bit about your continuing education here in the United States?
Well, as I said, I started out in junior high school. As far as language goes, thank you for the compliment. There are some people, as soon as I say hello, they say, where are you from? I hear your accent. Okay, but I used to be able to pick up languages. I mean, it was just something I had. I never figured out how I learned perfect Russian, but I did. And I mean, Russians were complimenting me, so I seem to have had some kind of a linguistic gift. And I love language. I just have a love for it, which is, I think, why I got hung up and hooked on writing. And I rewrite my stuff over and over again, because each time I look at it, I think I've found a better way to say it. So it's just something that I have, I guess. Oh, sorry, excuse me, this lady has the mic.
Well, actually, that was my next question. Could you tell us something about your husband, your children, what they are doing? How long were you married? And
okay.
Was he also from Poland, or?
No. Well, I was married for 20 years the first time around. I had 2 children. Then my husband died in 1976. And then I made friends and married someone after 8 years of being friends with in 1989 with a completely well, my husband was a boy from the Bronx, the Bronx. Very, very, very talented, very artistic, ultimately very sick. My son, one son is now 57, the other is 51. Eventually, as I said, I remarried in 1989 to a boy from Brooklyn with, interestingly enough, German, Polish, Catholic background, and it was good. He died in 2007. So that's that.
Have your children been influenced in any way by your experiences in life?
The question was, just for the microphone, is have your children been influenced any way, or your grandchildren been influenced in any way?
From your experiences, have your children suffered from your experiences?
I don't know how they may not have, because I guess I became who I am partially because of whatever I experienced. I believe it has in some ways formed my values, attitudes to things. That's one thing. The other thing is that there are personalities who will reject, and then there are others who will accept that kind of thing. And
I don't understand what you mean.
I'm going to try to explain without showing my pain. My oldest son, who is 57, rejects any of that knowledge that I might impart. He rejects me. He protects his children from me. So that's how some people respond to this person that's been formed by those things. My other son, who is 51 now, responds in a very different way. He is frugal. He doesn't waste. Whenever something really bad happens to him, he says, well, it's not Siberia, I'll get over, he always comes into that. He says, oh, okay, yeah, it's not as bad as what you had it, which I don't know why he does that. Unnecessary.
What did you say? I didn't.
It wasn't as bad as she had.
It wasn't. He always says, well, it's not Siberia, and I'm not hungry. He always goes back to that. So these are different reactions from two different personalities. One rejects it completely, and the other one says, well, things are not as bad for me, he says, about his whatever, because he's made some really bad mistakes.
My question's a little different than that. In the years of befriending and knowing Holocaust survivors, there's some that discuss it, that go to the schools and talk about it, and there are others that we've been close to, never discussed it with their children, grandchildren, and I don't blame any of them, and kept it within. Which, did you keep it within, or did you discuss it with the children?
I can't say I discussed it because it was not a subject that was invited by their father. In other words, the atmosphere, the ambiance was not conducive to telling stories. As a matter of fact, it never even occurred to me to write about it. This is like washing my laundry out in public, but my motivation to even begin to write came in a very strange way. I never thought of writing or being a writer or being an author or any of those things. When my older son had his children and I asked to see them, he was very reluctant. He put all kinds of rocks in my way, and he was very unkind and unfriendly. And it occurred to me when I was taking care of my mother that she didn't really tell me anything about my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and I thought, gee, maybe these babies will someday want to know who their grandmother was, and if things continue as they are with their parent, with their father and their mother, they'll never know they even had a grandmother. And somehow, between taking care of my mother and realizing that I wanted to record what was happening with my mother for self-protective purposes, because my son, as I said, was very unfriendly, and I had a feeling that he may come back at me someday. So I wrote things down on a daily basis. And then I said, gee, why don't I write down other things, like about my life? So if my grandchildren should ever want to know who I was, it'll be there for them. And then we moved, And there was a writing group across the street that I found out about. And I thought, well, I'll go down and take a look and ask if it was okay if I were to write about me. Because I thought, with my background, me was a totally it wasn't important. In the Soviet scheme of things, the me is really secondary. No, tertiary, if at all. So the lady who was in charge that particular day said, sit down. And I felt very frightened. But then they asked me to read what I had, and it was in pencil and a notebook. And they chastised me for making a laundry list of events, and they told me to show, don't tell. And slowly I began to peel down to be able to say what I just did. But it took, what, 10 years or something?
You're a remarkable woman.
Would you thank you?
Paid your dues many times over.
Yeah, and that's why I sometimes feel that my life was filled with must, have to, should, ought to, any other words that mean the same thing. Don't want no more.
But the fact is, you're still here.
And I aim to finally have some fun, and I am.
Good.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
You made a comment that at one point in your, while growing up, you had bouts of 2-3 hours of crying, which was a response, a stress response, basically.
I
to your,
imagine so.
And you called it
PTSD.
PTSD.
PTSD. What's the source? Is that a known phenomenon?
The PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome?
Yeah, no, I don't mean that. I mean the crying bouts connected to PTSD.
I have no idea. I never followed it up. Life is, I got things to do.
It makes sense, but I wonder where it comes from.
I have no idea. As I said, it just hit me one day, and I said, oh, that must be what it was. And it's like, so?
Has your family ever considered moving to Israel instead of the United States?
Well, I did, personally. Personally, I had considered it when I was 19. In fact, I was totally in love with a young man who was from Israel. But when I got there, we went to visit my grandmother, my mother and I. My grandmother lived on, by this time, they had moved to Israel from Poland, and they lived on Mount Carmel. So it was a consideration, but it didn't happen.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for coming, for your very good questions, and I especially would like to thank Becky Tran and Ruth Hohberg, and may you have a lot of fun in your future years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Please feel free to come forward and to meet Mrs. Hohberg personally if you like, and don't forget to take a flyer on your way out. Thank you for coming.